Hi, this is the wrap-up video for week 4 of the eGrad School's Commercialization and Entrepreneurship unit. This week, we discussed commercialization strategies. We began with looking at owner-created research and analyzing what opportunities there could be, what options are currently available, and potentially what the market gap is. We looked at how much risk is defined as, say, technical risk versus financial risk, and how much funding might be required. You would have reviewed commercialization models, which are considered structured pathways to turn your research into innovative inventions into marketable products or services to generate, obviously, economic value or potentially public good. We looked at licensing models and what type of research outputs are best suited for licensing. So we considered IP assignment, meaning you're selling the entire ownership of your idea or invention to another party, just like you would assign the title of your house or your car, should it be sold. And once the assignment is executed, the owner has no rights any longer to sell, license, or exploit that intellectual property, and therefore ceases to have influence on it or any ongoing financial return from it. For example, an owner might have received a lump sum payment or in exchange of, say, equity in the new entity plus cash for the IP assignment. That's very commonly done. Another example of a model is joint ventures, which are mutual agreements between two or more parties, usually companies, to focus on for a defined time to focus on work for a specific project or outcome. And these are typically outside of an existing institution or company structure, and this is generally done to minimize risk. In these models, the partners generally have collective expertise on a product or service offering, and they share all the costs, all the risks, and the assets and returns in the venture. Note, a JV is not a legal entity, and it ceases to exist when the project is over. And then there are startups. That's one that I have a lot of experience with. When the research outcome is in the early stage and requires additional development, founders, might seek to incorporate a startup company, also known potentially as a spin-out company. I did one of those from MIT. And that's the vehicle that can attract more funding and commercialize a good idea coming out of a university institution. Typically, these involve substantial investments from one or more parties, typically venture capital funds. And in Australia, angel funding or crowdsourcing are often employed to demonstrate there is interest in a potential market that backs your product or service. These are genuinely not approaches employed at the high end of research-intensive products out of, say, a research center from a university. There are different levels of risk versus reward, and funding models reflect that spectrum. So in this week's module, there was a really great matrix presented called the model comparison. And the table represents a nice, concise, and useful guide on commercialization models, licenses through public offerings, which are the big end of town, and what type of IP best suits each approach with a related risk profile. So definitely check it out. Definitely save it to PDF for future reference. It's really good. Last of all, there's a really helpful list of accelerator programs listed at the end of the module, including CSIRO's On Prime Accelerator program for research teams of between 2 to 5 members, all the way through Australia's Economic Accelerator, which is funded with about $1.6 billion to help convert academic research into commercialization or commercial outcomes. Again, many thanks to those of you who are actively engaging in the discussion forum. We've had some really interesting discussions around startups versus bootstrapping. Again, this is week 5. The course is flying by, but it's not too late to engage, discuss the content, and meet fellow researchers enrolled in the unit. So see you next for week 5 and the final week, where we'll be discussing value propositions and beginning to scaffold the business planning process. So these are approaches that you can take forward. You can pick up when you're ready to take the next step on your entrepreneurship and commercialization strategy. So I wish you all a lovely weekend and see you next week for week 5.